Good afternoon. Good afternoon. And welcome to the City Club of Portland Friday Forum. I am John HORVICK, City Club President, and I'd like to welcome members and guests alike, those of you who join us today at the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB Radio or watching on Portland Community Media. Today, our panel will discuss how we can ensure that Oregon reaches the 40-40-20 education goals by 2025. But first, some announcements. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners ensures we put on the state's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to thank our media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are Bank of the Cascades, CenturyLink, Family Care Health Plans, Miller Nash, The Standard, and Stoll Reeves. We are grateful for your support and commitment to City Club's mission. Please join me in a warm round of applause for all of them. I also want to recognize and thank the members of City Club's GED Research Committee. Your report was published today, and we look forward to reading and discussing your findings and recommendations. Committee members who are in the audience today, will you please stand and be recognized for your hard work and dedication? And to that end, join us next week when City Club members will discuss, debate, and vote on the newly released GED report. Doors will open at 11, and we will begin the discussion and debate at 11:30. Online voting will be open until Wednesday, January 29th at 5 p.m. After the vote, we'll hear from renowned author and scholar Terry Fisher, professor at Harvard Law School, about innovation and intellectual property. You can learn more about club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, pdxcityclub.org. As always, City Club will be live tweeting at today's event. You can follow or mention us at pdxcityclub, and be sure to use the hashtag CityClub in your own tweets. We'll be having a Q&A session with our guests at the end of today's program. Members, please come to the microphone to ask your question. And for all our audience participants, please locate the index cards on the center of your tables and write your questions on them during the forum. We'll collect them prior to the start of the Q&A. And now to our program. Oregon has a high school dropout crisis, but our state does not adequately support the primary tool to help young adults get back on track for college and career, the GED. We have a second chance with the launch of a revised GED exam this year. Kate Brown has spent more than 20 years serving the people of Oregon in the Oregon House of Representatives and Oregon Senate, and now as Secretary of State. In February 2013, her office published republished an audit of the GED in Oregon. The audit identified a number of shortcomings in the state's administration of the system and proposed ways to improve them. In her prior legislative career, Secretary Brown led efforts to create a searchable online database for campaign contributions and expenditures, and reformed Oregon's initiative process to reduce fraud and protect citizens' right to petition their government. She was also instrumental in passing comprehensive civil rights and domestic partnership laws. Debi Faucette joined GED Testing Service in January 2011 to serve as the Senior Director of Field Outreach, charged to bring strategic direction in the interactions and relationships with key stakeholders in the fields that comprise the GED network. Her current role follows an extensive career in adult education at the local, state, and national levels. Diego Hernandez is the youngest and first Latino to be elected to the Reynolds School Board, where he currently serves. He has a master's in social work and extensive experience working with high school and college students and community-based organizations. Diego is co-executive director of Momentum Alliance, a youth-led nonprofit. Momentum Alliance's mission is to inspire youth to realize their power individually and collectively, and to mentor future social justice leaders. Last year, Momentum Alliance won City Club's first Civic Leaders Award, and also the Bank of the West Innovation in Philanthropy Award. As Chief Impact Officer of the United Way of Columbia-Willamette, Zeke Smith leads the community impact strategy through grant making, volunteerism, community convening, and policy work. Previously, Zeke served as the Chief of Staff to Portland Public Schools Superintendent Carol Smith, as well as Director of Community Engagement at All Hands Raised. He developed and implemented Connected by 25, which is designed to connect every Portland teen and young adult to school, work, and citizenship by the age of 25 through a coalition of public and private organizations, and most recently, Zeke chaired City Club's GED Research Committee. Moderating today's forum is Betsy Hammond, education reporter for the Oregonian. She covered schools and other subjects at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for 12 years before joining the Oregonian in 1997. Her 2012 series about Portland's alarmingly low graduation rate won a National Education Writers Association Investigative Prize. She now covers statewide education issues from early childhood through higher education. And so now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speakers to the stage.
Thank you, John, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us to learn about and discuss GED preparation in Oregon. The GED was created in the 1940s to help returning GIs find a path to college or to good jobs. It's changed quite a bit since then. In 2012, almost 13,000 Oregonians took a GED test, and nearly 8,000 of them passed, earning a GED certificate. Almost 2/3 of those test takers were younger than 25, 3/4 of them were under age 30. But most of us only vaguely understand what the GED test is really about and what is the system that we have in Oregon to prepare students to take it and pass it. One thing we do know is that the best option for teenagers in our state is for them to stay in high school and get that high school diploma. High school is free. A high school diploma is proven to open doors for a lifetime. And school districts in our state are guaranteed funding from the state to educate any student up to age 21 who doesn't have a diploma. But right now in Oregon, only about 75% of students who start high school here manage to earn that diploma. That's really disappointing for every teen who doesn't get a diploma and for all of us and for our economy. High schools across Oregon and a lot of smart people in our state are working really hard to raise that graduation rate much higher than 75%. But sadly and inevitably, there will continue to be some young people in Oregon who don't manage to earn a diploma while they're young enough to stay in high school. Right now in our state, there are more than 50,000 people aged 20 to 25 who don't have a diploma or a GED. And that GED is their ticket to qualify for federal financial aid if they want to study in a community college. So I think it makes a ton of sense for us to explore Oregon's current GED pathway and what can be done to improve it. We'll start with Kate Brown. Kate, your office did an extensive audit around the GED in Oregon. You were really trying to look out for the best interests of Oregon adults who don't have a high school diploma and how to open doors of opportunity for them. What were the most important things that you found that Oregon or other actors need to do differently now that there's a new GED in place to open doors of opportunity to more adults?
Thanks for the question, Betsy. And our audit was released in February of 2013. And I have to tell you, I am extremely grateful to the City Club for doing this particular research project because it has already raised the profile of the issues facing the GED programs in Oregon tremendously. And so I'm very grateful to the City Club of Portland. So in terms of our audit, there were 3 things that were very compelling to me. Number one, the number of adults over the age of 18 who didn't have a GED or a high school diploma. Based on 2011 census figures, it's about 340,000 Oregonians. Just to put that number in perspective, that's more than the cities of Eugene and Salem put together. So it's a lot of folks that we need to make sure that their needs are addressed. Secondly, one of the other concerning factors that we found in our audit is that the current strategy, the 40-40-20 strategy that we're supposed to be implementing by 2025, does not meet the needs of this particular population. So that is very concerning. And then lastly, community colleges are the main purveyor of GED programs. Unlike most states, the community colleges in Oregon do not receive dedicated funding for their GED programs, and that must change. So in terms of moving forward, we must have a strategic plan in our 40-40-20 plan to address the needs of those over 18 who don't have a GED or a high school diploma, I believe that we need dedicated funding for these particular programs. And then lastly, in order to make sure that these young people, mostly, can have great success, we need to make sure that they have wraparound services, the support needed to be successful while they're going through GED or other type of programming. Whether it's childcare or transportation, they must have the support in order to be successful.
Thank you. Deb Faucette, thanks for joining us from GED Testing Services. Most of us have only a general idea of what the GED is like and what it takes to pass it. And now, debuting this month, we have a whole new, radically different GED. Can you just give us a quick primer on that new test? What is it? What does it cover? What do students need to know and be able to do in order to pass?
Absolutely. Thank you, and thank you all for having invited us to have a part of this conversation. We too want to thank the City Club of Portland, because this is such important work you're doing, and I hear Madam Secretary talk about the concerns that you have for how you move forward. And what I want to say is we are so proud that, unlike other states, this is a forward-facing conversation. It needs to be had in many other places, and we laud you and look forward to working with you on this. But the GED and the changes and all the, as I call it, kerfluffle about the changes, the bottom line, years ago we realized that our test, the 2002 version of the test, was not meeting the needs of producing adults with a credential that employers and post-secondary believed were appropriate for the level of work that they were expecting. And to that end, we prepared a new test. And the great news is we are not just a test anymore. It is a complete program. We now we tie into that student for preparation as they ready to take the test, for the test itself, and then a wealth of information to help them move beyond the test, because that's what this is really about. It's about tying into careers and college readiness, which is where your state is going. Thank goodness that's the lead conversation, but career and college readiness, preparation for those next moves. What the changes in the test are primarily, and what we want to make sure people understand is, yes, it is a more difficult test. There is a greater depth of knowledge that's being requested, but do not forget that that test is still testing the prevailing standard for graduating high school seniors first and foremost. We still norm this test against graduating high school seniors, and yet there are more difficult and challenging questions that would get to answer the question about, is this student prepared for career and college readiness? And that's the important thing, because once a student has taken any part of the test, they're going to now get a very deep wealth of information about, are they at that point for career and college readiness in those opportunities? If they are, they have the opportunity to not only get the high school equivalency credential, but that credential will say that they have a GED with honors. And that means they have shown the level of work that is deemed necessary for career and college readiness. And the difference is, this test is more aligned with critical thinking skills and problem-solving skills, which we heard loud and clear from our post-secondary partners and our business and community employers about what was needed. So that's where the test is going. It is not meant to disenfranchise people who are currently working at the prevailing standard for high school seniors, because there will always be the high school senior benchmark, but they have the opportunity to evidence higher skills that can help them to have better knowledge about where they are for workforce and career in college.
Thanks. Zeke Smith, you and your research committee here at City Club did a ton of work to dig into all aspects of GED preparation here in Oregon. The report is really well done, and I hope a lot of us will get a chance to read it. Can you tell us the most surprising information you uncovered, and please highlight for us a few of the most important recommendations that your committee made that you think are doable to improve the odds for young adults here in Oregon?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Betsy. I think it's important to kind of start back where you did earlier in terms of talking about the context that we're in. So the reality of where we are in this state right now is, as Betsy said, 1/4 of young Oregonians will not complete high school within 5 years of starting. It's a big number. Let's break into that for a second. So as of June 2012, which is the last year we have public data on high school graduation, 8,068 students who had entered high school in the state of Oregon 5 years previously had not yet received a diploma or its equivalent, had dropped out of school, and were still living in Oregon. As Betsy actually pointed out in an article a year ago, Oregon has the 4th worst graduation rate in the country. So there's a long way up for us to go. Schools and districts are definitely working hard to shift this paradigm, keeping kids in the classroom and shepherding them to graduation. But even the most optimistic predictions don't include a day anytime soon when every student will earn a diploma. And yet, while focused on tackling this incredibly low graduation rate, one of the things we found is that the state has not adequately supported the primary tool to help young adults get back on track for college and career, the GED. Providing services for young adult dropouts who wish to earn a GED certificate has barely been an afterthought in statewide planning, just being clear and honest about what we found. A mix of underfunded, under-coordinated public and private providers have done their best to fill the gap with a hodgepodge of mostly federal and local private funding, but they face a steep challenge. The day after a student leaves school for the last time without a diploma, his future prospects are grim, but they're not hopeless. The GED does offer adults a second chance. Though it's not a genuine high school equivalent, it is a way for them to advance into college and career, picking up some on what Debi was talking about. So Oregon does have a second chance to think about where the GED fits into the work that we're doing around education. Thanks to the strong leadership from our governor and the legislature, Oregon does have a bold vision for addressing our educational crisis through the 40-40-20 plan. The governor and lawmakers set a goal that by 2025, as the Secretary of State said, 40% of Oregonians will earn at least a bachelor's degree, 40% will earn an associate's degree or post-secondary credential, and the remaining 20% will earn at least a high school diploma or an alternative. So to reach 40-40-20 then, nearly every Oregonian will need a high school diploma or an alternative like the GED. That's just a fact in terms of where we're headed. It's not a secret that in recent years the GED has suffered from a poor reputation among employers, educators, and the public. Well, we say in our report that reputation was well-deserved. Research shows that GED recipients fared little or no better than other high school dropouts. But the reality is there's an opportunity for this to change with the new GED test in front of us. The new GED has a second chance to dispel past criticism and serve as a useful educational stepping stone for adults who did not complete high school. Whether it does so remains to be seen. But for the first time, the GED is explicitly designed to assess the college and career readiness of those who complete it. Additionally, the new exam, as you heard from Debi, provides a wealth of information about GED test preparation centers, about student performance, and that information can help the state target support towards successful programs and replicate their techniques in different communities. We're going to know for whom and in which communities the GED is a viable pathway to success and for whom it is not. To maximize this opportunity for success, Oregon must change how it approaches the GED. The fact that Oregon neither coordinates support for the GED across state departments nor tracks expenditures on them creates an environment in which accountability is virtually impossible and success remains elusive. So our report makes a few specific recommendations to help Oregon capitalize on this second chance. At a high level, a couple of them are this. Develop a coordinated state funding and strategic framework for GED preparation, testing, soft skill development programs, and related wraparound services. Prepare an annual report that contains a clear accounting of state funds that are allocated for GED test preparation, testing, and related support services, as well as an annual report on GED success rates across Oregon, disaggregated by race and geography. And lastly, allocate dedicated state funding to subsidize GED testing for qualified students with demonstrable need. If it's important to us that every single adult Oregonian has a high school diploma or its equivalent, then income shouldn't get in the way of their capacity to make that happen. It's not too late for us to do this. In fact, this might be a great opportunity. There are new hires and appointments to several key positions in state government within the last year that make this a great opportunity. We think the GED at this point offers a second chance for many people and institutions. Adults who dropped out of high school and hope to advance to college or career, the GED itself. If students who earn the new GED credential succeed in college and career, this will help to rehabilitate the credential's image. And lastly, the state of Oregon as a whole. We can finally make the institutional and programmatic changes that will support those adults if we want to do it. Thank you, Betsy.
Diego, you work directly with a lot of marginalized students who face challenges in completing their education and with whom Oregon Public Schools have low rates of success. What are your hopes and what are your concerns about what we're discussing today when you think about young people who you work with on the front lines in our community?
So the GED, I believe, is really important, especially for students who deserve and need a second chance. With that being said, we all know that with dropout rates disproportionately affecting communities of color and low graduation rates amongst communities of color, we need that second opportunity. The GED is something that our community truly needs. But how is this really impacting students right now? And some of the concerns that came to mind and in conversations with community-based organizations and some of the students directly affected by the changes, we all know that the majority of the people taking the GED are low income. And it looks bleak for them because there's an increase at cost, a shift to only computerized forms of testing, and it's more difficult. The test itself, more rigorous. And in what I found, you are required to have a state ID and a passport to be able to take this test. When it comes to cost, the test is now $155, almost doubled in certain places. This will definitely have a huge impact on the affordability of the test, especially with homeless youth who are looking for a way out. The question becomes, who will absorb the cost, right? The test takers, the community organizations, or will the state subsidize costs for low-income test takers? A shift to computerized forms of testing is going to impact the accessibility of the test for many low-income folks. You might think otherwise, but actually, especially for immigrant, rural, and English as a second language takers, there's an assumption made that just because technology is a mainstream tool with our youth, that everyone has the same accessibility to the computers and computer skills. The reality is far, I worked in schools and I could tell you that there are a lot of students who may know how to use an iPad, but don't know how to type. A shift to, the new changes will undoubtedly impact immigrant and refugee communities in a negative way, actually. We can already see the impact in the HEP program at the University of Oregon. The HEP program is a high school equivalency program for migrant and seasonal farm workers working to get a GED. Its enrollment numbers from last term were 30, and this term went down to 19. I asked the program, what do you attribute this decrease to? Some of it was, well, there's this fear that they don't have the computer skills they need to take it, so therefore they're not going to take it. And also there's a requirement when it comes to an online form of registration that you have to provide a state ID or a passport. They also mentioned that they haven't received their curriculum in order to teach to the test, even though they started their program, but that's a different story. A tougher and more rigorous test also means that more support will be needed. Like the report also said, there needs to be wraparound services. GED programs that do not provide wraparound social and economic support would be ineffective. As far as, where am I in time? I don't want to go over, I'm sorry.
30 seconds.
I got 3 seconds?
30.
Oh, cool. I can make a lot of points in 30 seconds. So as far as what the school districts are doing, I know that certain school districts do provide services for GED preparation. In the school district that I'm school board member of, I think we're taking a different approach. The approach is prevention. And working towards intervention programs so that we do reduce dropout rates, so that we do get the graduation rates that we need in order to be a successful community. Yeah, that's my 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. Diego Hernandez, you raised some real concerns about equality of access to GED preparation and GED testing, particularly for immigrant, rural, and second language students. Deb Faucette, could you at least start us out with some information about barriers and what can be done to ameliorate some of that? Also, the move to online and what you know about the impacts that will have on access.
I do. And thank you for the opportunity. And Diego, we have heard loud and clear, and I'm really happy to have an opportunity to address some of the things you are talking about, which leads me to understand we've got to do a better job of sharing information about how we do address those, because we understand cost. We understand that is an issue. I don't want to dig in the weeds, but we can answer questions about some creative things that other school systems have done or any other community-based organizations. We do understand. Let me give you my background. I come and still live in Louisiana, although I work for the testing service. And for about 15 years, I was the state director for adult ed and GED testing. So I do know what it is to work as a local program director and then as the state director with a number of other programs. We have some creative ways that in some of the systems where we know they don't have credit cards, even though it does have to be an online form of payment, if a local program or a CBO, there's ability for someone with access to a money card or a credit card to purchase vouchers. In some of the community colleges, they say, we've got a bursar's office. Students are used to bringing money in. We'll work with community colleges, and they can either do through credit, paying upon redemption of those vouchers for those students. So in those situations, the students really think they're still paying cash because they come to the bursar's office and make a payment, and they're issued a code number that when they go online, they can put that code number in. So, you know, we hear that loud and clear, and I understood that. And years ago when I'd start talking about this, I'd go immediately to, here are some of the things through vouchers that can save that issue. We need to go back and talk about the requirement. We do have some creative ways, and I'll have to go back and see exactly what is allowed in Oregon. Yes, you do have to have an ID, but we certainly can't require a social security number. That is not a requirement that we have. You know, so we need to talk about that, and I can get, you know, what I'm hearing is we've got to get more information to you and give you some direct answers. The rigor of the test, I think I addressed some of that earlier. Yes, there are more difficult questions, but that's not going to stop a student from the prevailing standard of a high school graduate as it is normed against current high school graduates. So yes, they will see more difficult questions. They will get great information about how to improve and move to those things that they were weak in. There's a very robust score report for strengths and weaknesses, and that's how you move forward quickly. And with that direct information, we believe it will take less time to get a student through their preparation, which is what you're looking to do to show success. It will take less time because now they're going to know exactly the skills that they need to work on, rather than saying, I failed math. I got to study everything in math because I don't know what I failed. So there are some things we have there. And one of the other issues, the computer skills. We definitely want to share information to get over the fear of the computer skills. Number one, students and your concern for economic development and filling these middle skill jobs, they are going, you know, that is a requirement. Computing skills, we know that by doing a computer-based test, the student is prepared and has literacy skills that I can't think of many jobs out there where some type of computer literacy isn't going to be a requirement. We felt very strongly that that was one of the really important things to prepare students with. The other thing, the hunters and peckers, we have done the studies, and I have seen and observed 65-year-old people taking the test concerned about they didn't actually know the keyboarding. But if they have basic hunting and pecking skills, they can get through this test. So there are people who would have difficulty regardless, but I think we need to, it's incumbent upon me to provide better information for you all to disseminate to answer some of your questions, Diego, and I thank you for raising them. I think they're very important.
We don't have a spokesperson from a community college or a GED prep provider here on the panel. So Zeke Smith, I'm going to ask you as a representative of a committee that reached out to a lot of those folks and did a lot of study. If you could add to that in terms of what you heard from providers about their concerns about equity and barriers that may exist to helping rural immigrant second language folks in Oregon get the preparation and pass this test.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the things that was interesting as we went through this process is we didn't know what we didn't know about the new GED until we learned more about the new GED. And we were about halfway through the process, and we kind of sat there as a committee and realized, wow, there's a lot of information and misinformation about this new GED. And on the ground, for those providers that came and spoke to us, it was really clear that they had a varying degree of understanding of what was happening. It's part of the reason why we felt like the state needs to assert itself in terms of helping to make sure that there's some consistency, both in terms of the rollout and the kind of support that occurs. Diego talked about a number of the key issues, so I won't hit on them too hard, but the question of curriculum for the new GED test is an important one. It's one that people are concerned about, not just in terms of how do we teach to this test differently, but also what specifically does the curriculum, what curriculum should we use? There are concerns about the costs associated with that at the local level. There are definitely concerns about the applicability of both how students will be taking the test and what material or content it is in the test for specific populations, immigrant populations, and communities from different cultures. That being said, I think that there are a couple ways that we can look at this as a state. One is we can just kind of let it happen, which is the way that I think that we frankly addressed it in the past, which isn't to say that there isn't a GED coordinator at the state level, but the level of kind of consistent application that we do in the state is pretty minimal. So we can just kind of let it happen to us, or we could as a state say, where do we want to be intentional about how we implement what we've got in this state, and what information do we need to make decisions about where this is working and where it's not working. There are other states that have looked at other tests. There are 2 other tests in particular that a number of states have looked at and are implementing. Our state has said at this point we're going to continue to move just with the GED, but our committee felt like it was really important that as we get the analysis of for whom this test is working and not working, that we reconsider as a state whether or not this is the only test that we should be offering in this state. So that's one option that we can look at as we move forward. And then I just think in terms of how the test hits the ground, we've got some work to do to really pay attention to in which communities it's working and which not. And I mean that both, as I said earlier, geographically. I also mean that by race. And I think that's something we actually can handle locally, and we don't need to depend on the feds or depend on the GED testing service to do for us.
If I can add on to that comment as well, I think one of the challenges for this population is that what contributed to these students dropping out of high school are the same things that challenge them in completing their GED, right? So the other piece of the equity component, obviously I agree with Diego that we need to make sure that these students don't drop out in the first place. But when they do drop out, and in order to get them through the GED process, we need to make sure that the what I call wraparound services, or the supports done in a culturally competent way, are in place. For a lot of the students, it might be childcare, it may be transportation, they may be working to help support their family. We need to be able to address those issues. And I think for me, one of the reasons why it is so important that our community colleges have dedicated funding for GED programs is because that will enable them to meet the needs of the students directly in terms of the GED program, adult basic skills, and adult basic education, but also will enable other services from DHS to provide the support services they desperately need. We are one of the only states in the nation that does not have dedicated funding for these programs at the community college level. That must change.
Well, thank
Can I
you.
jump in there?
Thank you for that, Kate Brown. And I wanted to ask you a little bit of a follow-up on that. I thought it was interesting the way your audit findings and recommendations and the recommendations contained in the City Club report align on that point, that there should be dedicated state funding for this. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you know about from looking at other states, from thinking it through? how might that work? How much money are we talking about? Would it definitely be limited to community colleges? What agency would oversee or set the metrics for how that might work? And Zeke Smith, you might be able to add to this too, but can you just help us picture how that might work and the order of magnitude of funding you might be talking about?
Sure. We really don't know the answer to your question, and that's why I found the recommendation in the City Club report that the governor should direct the Department of Administrative Services, who we fondly refer to as DAS, to prepare an annual report that contains a clear accounting of state funds that are allocated for GED test preparation, testing, and related support services. So we don't know the answer. We need a baseline. And I think that's one of the first things that we can do. And I'm hoping it doesn't need a bill in the Oregon legislature, though I know they would respond very quickly. But I suspect we can do this without statutory change.
Can I add?
Sure.
I'm not sure. So I looked at other states and reasons why they came up with alternative tests. And those reasons were similar to the concerns that I brought up, but some of it was also who owns the GED. And it was a for-profit company named Pearson's View. And certain organizations within those states brought up the concern that they might be monopolizing what the future cost of that test might be. And I'm sure that states that took that into consideration listened to those organizations that were saying that. And I've heard similar concerns because I myself called a few community colleges and nonprofits to talk about the GED program. And the similar concerns came up. They don't know if the cost of the test is going to increase. They just don't know. And we don't really have a state mandate that controls the cost or if we subsidize it.
Zeke, in your report, you talked a little bit about what is known to this point about the cost structure, both for who is subsidizing the cost, who's paying the cost. What can you tell us more about the cost to students and how that looks going forward?
Yeah, so first I can tell you it gets complicated really quick, and folks that are on the ground know that. So there's the question of what does the GED test cost to take for an individual? To what degree is that subsidized? In some states, they've decided that they don't want the individual to have to pay that cost at all. So in New York State, when you take what was the GED test, they've actually switched to a different test at this point, but when you take that test, the individual doesn't pay it at all. There's the cost for the preparation, and that at this point in this state is really variable depending on where you enter, right? So the places that people prepare for the GED test are not regulated by the state. You can do it online. You might be doing it in a church basement. You might be doing it at a community college, or you might be doing it through a community-based provider who may have some federal funding to support that, might have some local funding to support that. But what I'm getting at is it's variable across the state, and it's variable for different populations, which inherently means it's going to be inequitable as we look at it. Then you have the support services and the additional supports that we know that there's evidence that in order for the kinds of individuals that we're talking about to successfully get the GED, we've got to support them to be able to do that effectively. That is things like childcare and transportation, but it's also addressing some of the other barriers that they may have in their life. So there are a whole host of costs associated with this. Some states, I think Kentucky is one of them, have actually kind of looked at the entire framework and said, really, what does it cost, and what role do we want the GED to play in how people get to success in our state? So taking into consideration those different costs. Right now, those resources are allocated across multiple state departments, from multiple federal departments, and local individuals and organizations have to make decisions about how and where they have the opportunity to access those resources. So part of what we said in the report is we want to create more of a both baseline of understanding, as the Secretary of State said, but also begin to be intentional about how we address that as a state. We also worked within a frame where we recognized that our state has already made some decisions about how to move forward. So the decision was made to move forward with the GED testing service in the near term. As I said earlier, we talked about reevaluating that question based on legitimate information as we move forward, but in the immediate, that's where we are. So I think for us, the question as a state is, how do we want that to play out? And as Diego said earlier, who bears what cost as we try to have this be a part of our 40-40-20 plan.
Zeke, you seem pretty confident that a report will emerge and that we'll get better baseline information about what's working, what's not, what's going on with GED in Oregon. Could you tell me a little bit more about why you're confident that will happen? And is there a venue or a time frame that people who agree with you and want that to happen should be aware of to press for that to happen?
Sure. So I'm confident that there's an opportunity for us to have a report in this state if we choose to take some action to ensure that that happens. So what we know is that the GED testing service has a level of analytics associated with the test at this point, which is a lot more comprehensive than anybody's had access to before. We know that they are currently negotiating with different states how to provide that access in a way that both honors personal privacy, but also gives really great data at a statewide level, gives data at a regional level, gives data at a testing center level, and even gives data back to the individual students, which can then be shared those students can then share with their instructors. So there's a whole plethora of information which we could be using to both evaluate how this system is rolling out and to get a sense of where we need to provide additional support. In order for that confidence to play out, our state needs to take some action to decide how they want that information played out. I mean, on the flip side of this, one of the things we talked about a lot as a community, as a committee, is that it's a lot of personal information that could be shared. So what are the regulations that are in place to ensure that the information is used effectively? That, we think, needs to happen at a statewide level and then needs to be negotiated with the GED testing service.
Did you have something to add, Deb?
Well, I do, and thank you, because you do understand our system. When you were talking about the data that you need, one of the important things when we talk about the program that we have to offer now, everything runs through a one-stop shop, which is the My GED, which is a portal where the students enter into what the states have access to, and I'll give a little more detail in there. When you were talking about the state of Oregon wants to dig deeper into the data, I laud you for that. That is exactly where states need to be, and the nice thing is we are the partner to help you get that information. The GED analytics tool is something that we have already been in the process with the state of Oregon and other states. It is a very robust, comprehensive data subset that can be sliced and diced down to the student level. But again, it is negotiated through a user agreement with the state of Oregon through the GED state administrator and their sign-offs. So the information will be available. Obviously, we are in the first month of the new test. It takes a little time to get enough data for the validity and the slicing and dicing of the data. But there is that data available, and we've never had such comprehensive information. That's for the state down to the local. The GED score report has, as I mentioned, is something they get after they take the test module. Very specific information for the students. And Diego, I just want you to know that GED Testing Service has made a commitment that the base price of the test is the same through 2015. I can't speak for anybody else out there, but we've made that commitment, so there is no question.
Oh, it's about time for us to move to the question and answer portion of our program. So if you've got that burning question that you want asked, please go ahead and write it down on the index card on your table. And then once you've got that done, you'll want to raise it high so that Rachel can come and get it from you and make sure you have an opportunity to have that asked. We're also going to invite members of the City Club to come to the microphone to ask their question. Asking questions at the Friday Forum microphone is a benefit of City Club membership. Membership is open to everyone. Before asking your question, please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your question in 30 seconds or less, and it is to be a question. And I'll also make sure to read at least one question and hopefully more from the index cards. So without further ado, please introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Shine. I'm a City Club member and a colleague of Diego's. I'm interested, Secretary of State, in what we've learned actually around the requirement of ID in voting that can help us here with the requirement for ID and GED testing, which we know both in voting and in testing is a greater barrier disproportionately for low income and homeless people, things like that. Have we learned anything about that?
Well, thank you for the question. I'll refer to it in terms of voting across the country, and I think many of you know in this room that a number of states across the nation have put in place what I would call barriers to people participating in their basic fundamental right of franchise through voter ID laws. Two examples, Texas has a voter ID law that allows you to use your concealed weapons permit but doesn't allow you to use your student ID. North Carolina recently, I'm not kidding, North Carolina recently took away their early voter registration for 17-year-olds. We know that these ID requirements limit access to voting for a number of folks, for victims of domestic violence, for folks living in low-income communities, for mobile populations, and for students. So it has a huge impact on who's able to vote. In terms of the GED test, I'm going to turn it over to Debi.
In terms of the GED test, we in the past, we defer with the state, so I must apologize. I'll have to go back and find out if there's something over and above. But when we have issued ID numbers for folks who did not have the types of ID that were necessary. So from a national perspective, we did not have that barrier. We do require a photo ID of some sort, a government ID, but that can take many forms, and we also work to make sure that there is some way that a number can be present. So I'll have to go and do a little more digging on exactly how that affects our folks in Oregon, but we have worked to try to make sure nobody is unable to, that everybody is able to access the test.
And Rebecca, I think you know that the legislature passed this last legislative session statute after working on it for over 10 years that allows young people who have been in the country and been in Oregon for at least 3 years to go to our universities and community colleges without providing proof of citizenship, and they will get access to our universities. So that is a huge move forward.
Go ahead.
Chris Andre, City Club member. Thanks all of you for being here. Every point of view, every voice has been unique and incredibly informative. My question is, again, somewhat of a follow-up to the previous one, and it concerns discrimination, actually. What about people in prisons who get their GED in prisons and then have to transition into the greater community outside? They're already going into a situation that is heavily biased against them. Is there a support system? Is there any way to make the GED testing more available to them, and once they get out, not in any way, shape, or form held against them?
Zeke Smith, you want to weigh in on that? I know that a lot of people do get GEDs in prison. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, so the committee, we interviewed the Oregon Youth Authority education director, I think was his title, and we had a very robust discussion both about how currently the GED plays out in the Oregon Youth Authority, but also how it plays out in the Department of Corrections, so both youth that are incarcerated as well as adults. And, you know, it was an interesting conversation. One of the things that I'll say is that there is not a level of coordination, so I'm going to beat a dead horse in some ways. There's not a level of coordination between those departments and the needs of the individuals in those systems and the Department of Education and Community College and Workforce Development. So it gets back to the strategic plan we were talking about, really having clarity about how the GED is intentionally an asset in our system to make sure that every individual adult has the skills and the capacity to be college and career ready. So I think there's a lot that can be, I mean, there are a number of prisoners that currently do get GEDs, but I think there's a lot that could be done to more effectively ensure that they have access to the system in a way that makes sense.
Actually, I'd like to move to another question, and Diego, I might ask you to handle this at least initially. Question from our audience: now that the test is more difficult, more expensive, and harder to access, how do we motivate students to prepare for and take this test? Could you share some thoughts?
Yeah, the good thing about this test is based on Common Core standards. Some might say it's not a good thing, but our K through 12 system is working to implement and embed these standards into the system. So for young folks who are going through that type of standard, the language will be familiar. I'm going to say that in the future, folks who drop out will be familiar with the standards in which the GED is currently testing on. And I'm going to hip hop back into the prison question. I know that because I read the report, and Blue Mountain Community College offers services for folks who are incarcerated, but as some of you may know, certain prisons restrict computer access and use. So I believe that that's something that needs to be addressed, and looking at ways in which finding paper formats for prisoners. And something unique that I'm going to throw out real quick about folks in the military. The GED, how did it start? It started with when folks needed to go to World War II, and when they were coming back, they needed a form to go into college, and the GED was the way now. And if you have a GED now and try to get into the military, it's pretty limited. So they restrict the amount of folks that can enlist in the military because they found statistically, and probably this will change hopefully, that folks who are going into the military with the GED tend to drop out at really increased rates compared to those with a high school degree.
Okay, Deb Faucette, I have a question for you from the audience, and if you need to hip hop back to a previous question, I think you have permission to do that as well quickly. This is a very quick question, quick to answer. Will the GED be available in multiple languages?
The GED will be available in English and Spanish. The discussion about other languages is an ongoing discussion. But on the same day we started testing in English with the new test, we delivered the test in Spanish in some locations. So that's it. And I would like to hip hop because on the question of, of course, you have to do this, guys. But on the question of being more difficult, I'm going to go back to the reason that there was a change in the test to align with the more rigorous standards that the K-12 population was agreeing was needed for our high school students. We were following the national trend that if we said this prepared people for college and career, we had to step up and provide that additional emphasis on those higher order thinking skills and problem solving. We are negligent in serving our adult learners if we don't move to this increased rigor. It has to happen because if they're going to be successful, it has to be there. As far as the cost, one of the things we hope will help is our test is a test that will be a pay-as-you-go. So granted, we understand there's no longer a need to come up with the whole battery price. When you're ready for a test, you pay for it and you take science. When you're ready for the math, you pay and you take the math. That's a very different paradigm shift.
Hey, great. I'd love to get out to our next City Club member at the microphone, please.
Muriel Lezak, City Club member. This is a cost question. As a test user, I am very unhappily familiar with Pearson's pricing policies. And what I'm interested in is what happens to the test taker who fails. Do they have to pay again to retake the test?
We have announced a discount on the retakes, and in the state of Oregon, it is free for the first 2 retakes on each content area. Free retakes for the first 2, so that's up to 8 free retakes. 4 content areas, 2 free retakes, and the state of Oregon has also waived their fee, so it truly is a free retake.
Okay, I think we have time for at least one more question.
Hi, Sue Shattuck, City Club member. I'm most interested in the cohort that has just most recently dropped out of high school. And I wonder if you have any data on how close they are to graduating and if there might not be a benefit for them being able to go another semester or another year to get their high school diploma.
I'll take a little bit of that, actually. Oregon has made it very clear that students are entitled to remain in school for free until they turn 19, and the state will pay for them to remain in school for free until they are 21. And there has been an increasing trend of what we call fifth-year seniors, students whose schools are encouraging them to come back for that last credit or 2 or 3 or 4, and more of them are getting that diploma. So that's great news, and hopefully that trend will continue. There isn't a statistical report about exactly how many credits they're missing, but you're right that a lot of them are close. And some high schools are doing a wonderful job of convincing them to stick with it and get that diploma. Another question, please.
Virginia Cornyn, City Club member. My question is a slightly different one. The population of 340,000 of 18 and over without high school diploma or GED surprised me. One of so the question that it raises in my mind is, what does that do to Oregon as a competitive state for labor force, and are we looking at economic development resources as well as education resources to fix this problem?
Yes, I would answer that is yes, we are looking at economic development resources, but I think it goes back to the discussion we had earlier, and that is mapping all of the resources that are currently being spent on GED and GED preparation and support services. And I would consider certainly workforce development to be part of that. So it's mapping those services.
Go ahead.
Andrew Beeson, City Club member. Hello, friends. Thank you for the topic. I am very struck listening as we think about how difficult things are to coordinate, how complex it is to answer some of the questions, do we have confidence about a report coming out? I'm struck by who ultimately owns these students and this outcome. I honestly don't know who to go to ask, are we making progress on this, and who to go to when we think about, is this the appropriate alternative to serve this populations of students? And so my question is that in the ideal world, like, how should we organize this thing so that we are owning these students and this progress in a way that I know that I have to as an advocate for marginalized students?
Zeke Smith, you want to take a stab at that, especially at least describing who owns them now?
Yeah, Andrew, thank you for the question. One of the things that I wanted to make sure got out there was that the committee talked a lot about the fact that and frankly, much of this was predicated by a conversation we had with the Secretary of State in the beginning of our work. We wouldn't be in the situation we're in right now if there was a natural constituency with the political and the social capital to take this issue on. So we're in the position where we've got 340,000 individual adults who don't have a high school diploma because nobody's really taken the question on. So your question is so right. I think right now that the committee was very intentional about saying we think that the new chief education officer has a key stake in the process. We think the governor has a stake in the process. We think the new director of community college and workforce development has a stake in the process. So there are 3 specific individuals who we both are optimistic are really intentional about wanting to address this issue, but are the right folks for us to, for those who care about this issue, to go advocate with to make sure that we address this differently. Unless leaders at a statewide level are willing to say we need to take this issue on, and we need to pay attention to both what's happened to date and how we want this to look differently moving forward. It doesn't really matter what happens at the local level. It's going to continue to be variable, and we're going to continue to see a lack of equity. So we believe really strongly on the committee that it's important that we take this on at the highest level.
Andrew, and I also appreciate the question. It was the conversation that I had with the City Club Research Committee. This population doesn't have a voice at the table, and so I think it's incumbent upon each and every one of us to make sure these voices are heard. And one of the reasons I was so excited about the City Club report is that I know that you all as members will be contacting your legislators and your statewide elected officials after this forum and saying, this is an important issue. We care about these 25% of students. We must meet their needs. And so that's why I'm excited about the City Club report, because I hope it will engage each and every one of us to get excited, to call our elected officials and tell them we want something done on this issue.
Unfortunately, we've run out of broadcast time for further questions, and we'll have to stop for the day. Please join us next week for discussion on innovation and intellectual property with Terry Fisher of Harvard Law School. And as we close today, please join me in offering our sincere thanks to Secretary of State Kate Brown, Debi Faucette, Zeke Smith, Diego Hernandez, and Betsy Hammond. We are adjourned.